Rude HOA lady tries to kick me out, then I reveal I own the entire community. The ink wasn't even dry on the deed, the scent of fresh paint barely clinging to the walls, and already, the vultures were circling. My new house, a symbol of years of relentless hustle and sacrifice, was supposed to be my sanctuary, my slice of hard-won peace. But that illusion shattered faster than glass. Living across the street was her, Karen, a name synonymous with entitlement and weaponized neighborliness, the self-proclaimed queen bee of this meticulously manicured HOA hellscape. Barely had I wrestled the last roll of bubble wrap from my prized Persian rug when it arrived, a crisp, white envelope, a scarlet HOA violation notice, practically screaming from its surface. A shiver crawled down my spine. This was war. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, the bureaucratic jargon inside dripping with passive aggression. Dear resident, it began, each word a tiny barb. It has come to our attention that your residence violates several community guidelines. Please remove all non-conforming furniture from your front porch and ensure all visible belongings meet aesthetic standards. Failure to comply will result in further action. Sincerely, the HOA Board. I stormed onto my porch, eyes blazing. One chair. A single, sleek, modern outdoor chair, its lines echoing the architecture of the house itself. No inflatable Santas, no garish garden gnomes, no rusted-out jalopies polluting my driveway. Nothing that could warrant this attack. Then I saw her. Karen. Standing sentinel across the street, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were bone-white, a predatory glint in her eyes. I forced a smile, a pathetic attempt at civility. "Morning, neighbor!" I called out, my voice strained. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she stalked across the street, her heels clicking on the pristine pavement like a metronome counting down to confrontation. "You need to remove that chair," she snapped, her voice tight with barely suppressed rage, her finger jabbing at the offending object as if it were a personal affront. "What? Why?" I stammered, caught off guard by her hostility. "It doesn't match community standards," she huffed, her nose tilting towards the heavens as if she'd caught a whiff of something truly offensive. "We don't allow unsightly furniture ruining the neighborhood aesthetic." I stared at the chair, then back at her, incredulity bubbling inside me. "Karen, it's just a chair. It's not approved," she insisted, her voice a venomous whisper. "And neither is your house." My eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" She smirked, a cruel, predatory curve of her lips. "We weren't informed of a new tenant. Did the previous owner get this purchase approved by the board?" The penny dropped. Karen thought I was a renter. She assumed I was some transient interloper, invading her precious domain without her explicit permission. A slow burn of anger began to simmer in my chest. I decided to play along, to savor the moment when I shattered her carefully constructed reality. "I don't think the owner needed to check in with you," I said innocently, feigning ignorance. Her smile widened, the lines around her eyes crinkling with malicious glee, like a spider anticipating its prey. "Oh, but they do. See, we have strict policies about who can live here. If the homeowner didn't get this approved, then I'm afraid I'll have to start the eviction process." I let out a short, theatrical laugh. "Eviction? For a chair?" "Yes," she said smugly, her eyes gleaming. "We don't allow renters to disturb our community harmony." That's when I decided to drop the bomb, to wipe that self-satisfied smirk off her face. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my house keys, and twirled them around my finger, the metal glinting in the sunlight like a tiny, defiant beacon. "That's great to hear, Karen, because I'm not a renter. I'm the new owner." Her entire expression crumpled. The confidence, the smug superiority, the carefully crafted mask of control, all gone in an instant, leaving behind a raw, ugly mess of disbelief and fury. You bought this house?" she stammered, her voice cracking like thin ice. I grinned, savoring her discomfiture. "Yep. Paid in full. Signed, sealed, delivered." Karen opened her mouth, then snapped it shut, her face a mask of sputtering rage. She looked genuinely horrified, as if I'd personally insulted her entire lineage. Then, as if she hadn't just threatened to kick me out of my own home, she plastered on the fakest, most saccharine smile I had ever seen. "Well," she said, her voice suddenly dripping with false sweetness, like honey laced with poison. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm the president of the HOA, so if you need anything, you can come to me." I nodded curtly, my stomach churning with disgust. Good to know. Then I turned and slammed the door in her face, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I thought that was the end of it, a minor skirmish in a much larger war. I was wrong. The next few days were a barrage of harassment, a relentless assault on my sanity. More HOA violation notices, each one more petty and ridiculous than the last. First, it was my porch light, apparently emitting the wrong shade of amber. Then, my trash bins deemed visible from the street, despite being neatly tucked behind a decorative screen. Then, the audacity of parking my car in my driveway. Karen was on a warpath, fueled by wounded pride and a desperate need to reassert her dominance. She couldn't evict me, so she was determined to make my life a living hell. But what she didn't know was that I had a secret, a weapon in my arsenal that would ultimately shatter her reign of terror. Because I didn't just own this house. I owned several houses. I owned a third of the entire neighborhood. And Karen, bless her oblivious heart, was about to learn just how much power I had. The next morning, I woke up to yet another HOA violation notice taped to my door, the paper practically vibrating with Karen's barely contained fury. But this one was different. It wasn't just a warning. It was a formal complaint, demanding an immediate hearing before the HOA board. My front yard was neglected and out of compliance with neighborhood standards. I had moved in less than a week ago, and my lawn was perfectly manicured, a testament to the previous owner's meticulous care. I stared at the paper, shaking my head, the absurdity of it all threatening to overwhelm me. Miller, my next-door neighbor, a genial, easygoing man with a perpetually amused expression, walked over, coffee in hand, grinning like he was watching a particularly juicy episode of reality TV unfold in real life. "You pissed off Queen Karen," he chuckled, nodding at the letter in my hand. "She's been running around all morning, talking to the other board members. She's out for blood." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I figured as much. She tried to evict me before realizing I own the house. Now she's just doubling down. Miller sipped his coffee, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, it gets better. She doesn't know you own more than just this place, does she?" I smirked, a surge of anticipation coursing through me. "Not yet." That afternoon, I walked into the HOA office, a nondescript building that reeked of stale coffee and simmering resentment, fully expecting Karen to have stacked the deck against me. And sure enough, there she was, already seated at the long, polished wooden conference table, a folder overflowing with paperwork spread out in front of her like a shield. The other board members sat beside her, their faces a mixture of boredom, exasperation, and thinly veiled amusement. Arthur, the HOA vice president, a perpetually harried-looking man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, barely glanced up as I sat down. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. Clearly even the other board members were sick of Karen's antics. Karen launched into her speech, her voice dripping with righteous indignation, flipping through her papers dramatically as if she were presenting evidence at a high-stakes trial. "As you all can see," she declared, her eyes narrowed, "this homeowner has repeatedly violated our standards. His lawn is unkempt, his porch is cluttered, and his deliveries are excessive. He is disrupting the harmony of our beautiful community." I leaned back in my chair, a flicker of amusement playing on my lips. "My lawn is mowed, my porch has exactly 1 chair, and I get Amazon deliveries just like everyone else here." Karen's face turned a shade of crimson that would make a beet blush. "That's not the point. The point is he doesn't respect the community's aesthetic." Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples wearily. "Karen, do you have actual evidence of these violations?" Karen gestured wildly at her paperwork, her voice rising in pitch. "I have photos." I looked at the images she had printed, each one more ludicrous than the last. One showed a single blade of grass, slightly taller than the others, a microscopic imperfection magnified into a neighborhood crisis. Another captured my trash bins on pickup day, literally at the curb where they were supposed to be. The last one showed a single Amazon package on my porch, a testament to my consumerist sins. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Karen, are you serious?" Karen scowled, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "This is a serious matter. We cannot allow homeowners to lower property values by disregarding the rules." That's when I decided to unleash my secret weapon. I pulled out my folder, a slim, innocuous-looking thing that contained the key to shattering Karen's carefully constructed world, and slid it across the table. "Karen, I think we need to discuss your violations." Karen stiffened, her eyes widening in alarm. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, a slow, predatory curve of my lips. "I did some digging. Turns out, as the self-proclaimed enforcer of HOA rules, you've been breaking quite a few yourself." I flipped to the first document, the paper rustling like the wings of a predatory bird. "For example, the community guidelines clearly state that trash cans cannot be left outside for more than 6 hours after pickup. Yet here's a photo of your bins still out the next morning." Karen's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks like water from a leaky faucet. That's irrelevant." "Oh, there's more," I continued, relentless in my pursuit. I flipped the page, the evidence piling up like a mountain of incriminating details. Guideline 14B states that all vehicles must be parked in designated driveways or garages. "But here's a picture of your car parked on the street," repeatedly. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her carefully constructed composure crumbling around her. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to sound dangerously calm, a hunter closing in on its prey. "And let's not forget the fact that you built an unapproved extension on your backyard patio. No permits, no approval from the board. That's a major violation." Arthur looked at the papers, his eyes widening in disbelief, then turned to Karen, his voice laced with weary disappointment. "Is this true, Karen?" Karen swallowed hard, her throat bobbing nervously. "That's different," Arthur sighed, closing the folder with a decisive thud. "Karen, we've had enough of this nonsense. You can't harass homeowners for non-existent violations while you're breaking half the rules yourself." Karen's entire body went rigid, her eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered fury. But... "Case dismissed," Arthur announced, standing up abruptly, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. "And Karen, you might want to get your violations sorted immediately." I smirked as I walked out, leaving Karen to stew in her toxic brew of rage and humiliation, her entire world crumbling around her. But she wasn't done. Not yet. As I left the building, I heard her mutter under her breath, her voice a venomous hiss. "I'll find another way." And I knew then that this war was far from over. The next few days were eerily quiet. No more violation notices, no more passive-aggressive messages from the HOA, and most importantly, no sign of Karen. It was suspicious, unnerving. Karen didn't just back down. She was planning something, I could feel it in my bones. The silence was a prelude to something far more sinister. Miller even joked, "Dude, you might want to check if she's building a secret bunker to plot your downfall." We laughed, but deep down, I knew he wasn't far off. Karen's silence wasn't surrender. It was a recalibration, a gathering of forces before the next, inevitable attack. And then it happened. A letter from the HOA arrived in my mailbox, the paper feeling cold and ominous in my hand. But this one wasn't a violation notice. It was an eviction notice, signed by the board, demanding I vacate my own home due to persistent community disruptions and failure to comply with homeowner standards. I laughed when I read it, a hollow, incredulous sound that echoed in the empty house. Karen was trying this. She had gone completely, spectacularly nuclear. Miller walked over just as I was holding up the paper, his eyes widening in disbelief as he took in the scene. "No way! She did it? Oh, she did it," I said, shaking my head, the absurdity of the situation washing over me. She went nuclear. Miller snatched the letter from my hand, reading it over, his brow furrowed in concern. Dude, she doesn't even have the power to evict you. The HOA doesn't own the property. They can fine you, harass you, but they can't just kick you out. I grinned, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. She's about to find that out the hard way. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. This was completely illegal, a blatant abuse of power. The HOA could enforce certain rules, levy fines, but an actual eviction? That was laughable, a legal impossibility. What made it even funnier, more deliciously ironic, was that Karen hadn't even gone through the proper channels. She had convinced a handful of board members to sign off on it, but it hadn't gone through any official process. In other words, she had faked an eviction order, a desperate act of self-preservation that would ultimately seal her doom. Instead of reacting, of confronting her directly, I waited. I wanted Karen to think she had won, to bask in the false glow of her perceived victory. And sure enough, the next morning, she was glowing, radiating an almost palpable sense of smug satisfaction. She was smiling, waving to neighbors, probably patting herself on the back for restoring order to her perfect community, for vanquishing the interloper who dared to disrupt her carefully constructed reality. That's when I decided it was time to let her know exactly who she was messing with, to pull back the curtain and reveal the true extent of my power. I called an emergency HOA meeting, not as a resident under attack, but as a property owner, as a force to be reckoned with. Karen was already seated when I arrived, looking smug beyond belief, her eyes practically sparkling with malicious glee. She barely contained her glee as she said, "I'm surprised you even showed up. We assumed you'd be packing by now." I set a stack of legal documents on the table, the sound echoing in the suddenly tense room, and leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "Karen, I came to discuss something important, the future of this community." Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "There's nothing to discuss. The board already made their decision. You have 30 days to vacate." I chuckled, a low, dangerous sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Yeah, about that. You see, you don't have the authority to evict me. The eviction notice you sent me is completely fraudulent. You didn't file it properly, it wasn't reviewed legally, and you bypassed the actual process." I slid a document across the table, the paper crisp and official, a stark contrast to Karen's flimsy, fabricated claims. "This is from my lawyer. Consider this a formal cease. If you don't retract your fake eviction, you're looking at a lawsuit." Karen's smile wavered, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the pressure. "This is nonsense. Oh, and one more thing," I continued, relentless in my pursuit, pulling out another document, the final nail in Karen's coffin. "I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but since you tried to remove me from my own home, I thought I'd clarify something. You do know I own multiple properties here, right?" Karen's jaw clenched, her face contorted with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "You what?" I nodded, savoring her discomfiture. "That's right. I own 10 houses in this neighborhood. That means I have a say in what happens here. In fact, according to the bylaws, because I own more than 10% of the properties in this community, I have voting power that surpasses even yours." Silence. Complete, utter silence. The kind of silence that descends before a storm. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, a volcanic flush of rage and humiliation that threatened to erupt at any moment. That's ridiculous. You..." Arthur, the vice president, cut her off, his voice firm and decisive. "Karen, is this true?" I smiled, pulling out one final document, the coup de grace that would finally end Karen's reign of terror. "And actually, I'd like to make a motion. Effective immediately, I'd like to propose a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." Karen's eyes went wide with panic, the full weight of her impending doom finally crashing down upon her. "You can't." Arthur cleared his throat, his expression grim. "He can." The vote was held right then and there, swift and decisive. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, stripped of her power and authority, her carefully constructed world reduced to ashes. And as her final act of desperation, she tried to argue, yell, and even threaten legal action, clinging to the remnants of her shattered power with a ferocity born of utter desperation. But the board was done with her. The neighborhood was done with her. Everyone was done with her. And within a week, a new HOA president was elected, a much more reasonable, sane, and less Karen-like individual, someone who listened to the residents and worked to improve the community, rather than trying to control it with an iron fist. As for Karen, she put her house up for sale the next day, her tail between her legs, defeated and humiliated. Miller sent me a picture of the for sale sign in her yard with a single, triumphant text, "Victory!" And just like that, the neighborhood was finally free, liberated from the tyranny of its self-proclaimed queen. Sometimes, people in positions of perceived power try to bully others, to use their influence to control and manipulate those around them. But remember, knowledge is power too. Knowing your rights, understanding the rules, and standing up for yourself can make all the difference. And sometimes, a little bit of unexpected ownership can turn the tables, shifting the balance of power in unexpected and satisfying ways. Don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem. You never know what cards you might be holding. What did you think of the story? Have you ever dealt with a Karen situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.